Hi everyone, it's Agnieszka Murdoch from 5 Minute Language. Welcome to my channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up. So today's video is another one in the series of Is X language difficult to learn? So I've made similar videos like this one about French, German and other languages as well, so make sure you check them out. This one is about Spanish because Spanish is a very popular language that many people are learning, and I'm sure that you guys are probably considering learning it as well because you're watching this video. So let's get started. So first I'm going to tell you why Spanish is an easy language to learn. So relative to English, and I assume you speak English because you're here and I'm speaking English, for English speakers, Spanish is a relatively easy language to learn. It's got a lot of similarities with English. So for example, it's got similar vocabulary. If you just Google Spanish English cognates, you will be able to see lists of vocabulary that are very similar in Spanish and in English. So that will obviously help you memorize some of the words that exist in Spanish. It can also be tricky because sometimes there are some false friends, so words that look the same and sound the same in both languages but actually mean something very different. But overall, there are a lot of words which are very similar and they actually mean the same thing. Spanish pronunciation is quite regular. So if you learn the rules, which there aren't too many of, you will know how to pronounce Spanish words. There aren't too many exceptions at all. So once you know the rules, it'll be quite easy. Syntax in Spanish is quite similar to English. It's quite simple. By syntax, I mean the word order in a sentence. So subject, verb, object. It works in a very similar way in both languages. So you don't have to worry about word order like in German or Japanese. It's quite simple. Tenses in Spanish are quite similar to English as well. So it's quite easy to kind of understand the concepts behind the grammatical tenses. For example, I am dancing, estoy bailando. It's a similar kind of idea. Estoy being the helping verb and bailando being a form of the verb to dance in Spanish, which has an ending which indicates it's a continuous tense like in English. Maybe this didn't make too much sense to you if you haven't learned a foreign language before, but once you start learning about Spanish tenses, you will see the similarities between the two languages very clearly. The next one is very important. There are a lot of learning resources because it's a very big language. It's spoken by so many different people and it's a very popular language to learn. So by resources, I don't just mean textbooks and books for learning Spanish. I also mean real life resources. So because there are so many countries that Spanish is spoken in, there will be a lot of things being produced by those countries. So literature, newspapers, TV shows, you name it. When you're learning Polish, for example, it's a small country, it's a small language that's only spoken in Poland. You will only be limited to having resources from that country, and it might be difficult for you to get hold of them because they will only be stocked by specialist bookshops, for example. So when you're learning a language like Spanish, you will have a lot of learning resources like textbooks, but also a lot of real-life resources such as newspapers, magazines, children's books, and so on. So now let's move on to the difficult aspects of Spanish. I don't want to say they're difficult because I don't want to put you off. So I'm going to say they're relatively difficult. So in other languages, some of these things are easier. In Spanish, they're more difficult. So the first one I'm going to mention is Spanish is spoken quite quickly. I'm sure if you've ever heard a Spanish person speak or a Spanish speaker speak, they speak quite quickly. So it will be more difficult for you to get the gist of a conversation as opposed to, for example, when someone is learning English, where English tends to be spoken more slowly. Okay, there are some letters in Spanish which are not pronounced like they're written. So the majority of the language is pronounced kind of how it's written. But there are a few different letters which are not, and that may be confusing to you. For example, the letter J, which is pronounced H, and the double L, which, depending on the accent, is not pronounced like in English. Then there will be the Z, which is pronounced differently in Spain and in South America, and also very differently to how it's pronounced in English. So you will have to learn those rules, but once you learn them, it will be less overwhelming. Then there are different accents in Spanish. So there's the Spanish and the South American Spanish, and then obviously within each of these, there are multiple different accents and multiple different varieties. So it might be quite confusing, so to speak, because of the differences in pronunciation and vocabulary, as opposed to learning a language which is quite consistent, such as Italian, which is spoken in Italy. Obviously there are dialects within Italy, but if you're learning Italian, most of the resources that you encounter will be spoken in kind of standard Italian. So with Spanish, that's not the case. You might come across listening material which is made by a person from Mexico and then a person from a specific region in Spain, and they will sound quite differently. Okay, so the final one is conjugation, which is not a problem which is specific to Spanish. It's a problem that's, well, I call it a problem. It's not really a problem. It's a concept that is not uncommon. In English, you don't really have conjugation. I mean, when you say, you know, I go, we go, you go, go is the same. But in languages like Spanish, French, Polish, German, the verb changes depending on what pronoun you're using. So you will have to learn those conjugations, and there are different conjugation patterns in Spanish as well. So not all verbs are conjugated in the same way, but there are differences, but there are also some rules that you can follow to learn that. Obviously, there are a lot of exceptions, so you will need to memorize some of the forms by heart, and that can make learning Spanish a little bit more kind of time consuming than learning other languages that don't have conjugated verbs. So that's it. I hope I didn't put you off learning Spanish. Spanish is a fantastic language to learn. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments below and let me know how long you've been learning Spanish as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!